The year was 2010. I was a freshly divorced 23-year-old living in northern Louisiana on my own, in a 2-story apartment with my wonderful dog. I had moved in just a month prior and was enjoying the peace and quiet. A fresh start after an emotionally crippling time in my life. It was a pleasant Sunday afternoon, summertime in Louisiana. I had decided to escape the heat by staying inside to watch a few episodes of It's Always Sunny with my dog Kingsley in my lap. The sun was shining through my windows, which in this complex took up half the living room wall, floor to near ceiling. I had blinds, but I had decided to adjust them so some natural light would come in. Now, the neighborhood wasn't so bad, but it wasn't the best. You definitely didn't leave anything outside, and you always lock your house and your car. I had seen my share of shady activity, so regardless of the time of day, my doors and windows were locked. It had also come to my attention that my ex had done drive-bys of my new place, and not wanting to be caught off guard, I was constantly checking that I had locked everything. A beat-up car pulled into the parking lot, which I could see out of my peripheral vision, across from a grassy area in front of my building. I didn't recognize the driver who stepped out, and I guess I didn't think anything of it at the time, until he walked in front of my window, staring directly inside my living room. The bushes in front of my windows were maybe waist high on me. I'm 5'4". So this man was staring right at me. We were keeping eye contact, no blinking, and there was no mistake. He saw I was inside by myself. From what I saw between the blinds, he was easily 6 feet tall, heavy set, bald with dark eyebrows and a goatee. He wore a short-sleeved button-up shirt over a dark t-shirt and jeans. I had never seen him in our complex before. Kingsley's head shot up, ears perked, his fur standing up on his neck. He was a friendly, playful dog and loved meeting everyone. But when I felt a low grumble from his stomach when he bolted up off the couch, I knew this wasn't a stranger he wanted to meet. My heart raced and I felt my palms tingle with anxiety. The door was locked. No way he could get in, right? Wrong. When I heard a key in the lock, I remember feeling many things at once. My heart stopped and jumped in my throat. My scalp felt like it was on fire, but my hands felt cold. Who was this guy? Why, of all fucking things, did he have a key to my apartment? I didn't have a gun. The front door was 6 feet to my left. The kitchen was at least 15 to my right. I didn't have time to run and grab a knife. I didn't have a baseball bat, and I doubt throwing my nearby shoes would deter a home intruder of his size. The door cracked open. I panicked. Kingsley let out the loudest bark I had ever heard, and in one leap was snarling at the door, his teeth bared, ready to attack. For the split second the door was open, I saw the man's eyes widen. Then he shut the door, and he knocked. I shit you not, this man knocked on the door, after he had already opened it with a key he somehow had. Kingsley was busy, letting out vicious growls, not acting at all like the giant goofball I knew him to be. I jumped up after him, grabbed his collar, and with the other hand grabbed the doorknob and opened it just enough for Kingsley to poke his head out. "Can I help you with something?" My voice shook. Anger and fear coursed through my veins.
"I'm here to pick up my mail. I'm expecting a package. I used to live here,"
the man said matter-of-factly, as if this was something I should have known. What the fuck? "You don't live here anymore. I live here. I don't have your mail."
"Seriously? Our mailboxes were at the apartment main office. I was expecting a package from FedEx. I want my package."
He took a half step forward, seeming impatient, angry, expecting somehow that I would have his mysterious mail and invite him in? No. Actually, 3 days prior, FedEx did come by with an envelope, but as the name on it wasn't mine, I didn't accept it. They came by with something a few days ago, but it wasn't mine, so I made them take it back. His face went red and he clenched his fists. I'm starting to panic.
"Why would you do that? That is my package and I was expecting it."
He exploded, waving his arms as if I was to blame. Kingsley leapt up, nearly dragging me out of the door. I yanked him back, and the man continued his rant.
I can't believe you would do something so fucking stupid. Now I have to go track it down myself. Do you know what a waste of time this is?
I was frantic at this point. I didn't know where this dude came from, why he still had a key to this place, why, when he saw me in the living room with a dog, he tried to come in, and why, of all things, was he freaking out over a stupid envelope. Look, man, I don't have your package. Just call fucking FedEx and take care of it yourself. The words sounded better in my head. Out loud, they sounded shaky and fearful, and I knew my lack of courage was a terrible disadvantage in this situation.
I can't believe this shit.
He was completely red, flailing around in rage. You gotta leave, I yelped, trying with all my might to keep a hold of poor Kingsley. I'm going to call the cops, I finally shouted out, figuring this would deter the now furious stranger in front of my door. For a split second, his eyes widened, and he took a step back.
I will be back.
He gulped and turned around. Kingsley let out a few growls. I patted him and shut the door, locking it, unlocking, then locking it again. I put him on a leash, grabbed my keys, and hurried to the front office. I told them what had just happened. I let them know the police would be notified, and demanded they change the locks and install a chain. Now. No way I was waiting for that psycho to come back. He never did. To this day, regardless of where I live, I keep my car, windows, and doors locked, and I double-check when I leave the house and go to bed. Thanks, asshole. It's been 3 years, and the paranoia persists. When I was in my early teens, early 80s, damn, that makes me feel old, we lived in the Chattanooga, Tennessee area. One weekend, I went with my church group to do some overnight spelunking in one of the caves in the area. Having gone into more commercialized caves in the past, this trip was not what I had expected, as this cave entrance was a small opening in a group of rocks on the side of a country road. No markers or signs. We hiked in for a few hours through some challenging terrain and slept overnight, then back out after breakfast. For a 13-year-old boy, it was a great adventure. Muddy, tight spaces to squeeze through, stalagmites, cave pools with blind fish, the works. There were about a dozen of us that went. All was well until we were told to go to bed for the night. All flashlights were off, and it was completely black as we were deep in the cave system. Sometime during the night, I awoke to something pulling on the foot end of my sleeping bag, dragging me deep into the black void. At first, I was annoyed more than anything, as I thought someone was pranking me. I was also in the Boy Scouts as well. With that rambunctious group, we were always pranking each other. I fumbled in my sleeping bag trying to find my flashlight to see who was doing this. Before I could find it, I realized I was speeding up. Next thing I know, I was sliding out of control, down a slick, damp, clay-packed hill. I did whatever I could to stop. I was digging my fingers in, but it wasn't working. I eventually did stop when the hill flattened out. I finally found my flashlight and looked around. Everyone was fast asleep, and any commotion I caused wasn't noticed. No perpetrators were seen, but I also discovered that I was about a foot away from a very deep chasm. Had I gone over the edge of the cliff, they would have never found me. For the following 3 decades, I wrote the whole thing off. Here's a few possible reasons this happened. Most likely, I picked a spot that was not as flat as I thought. I might have tossed and turned in my sleep, and that activity could have been enough to kickstart the potentially lethal slide. But the batshit crazy theory is that years later, I started watching paranormal shows. Some of the shows had some sort of deep earth creatures that want to keep us out of their domain. Then I had a what-if moment. Could it have been them? Was I attacked? About a year and a half ago, I had some friends come over. We'd been playing Magic the Gathering for a while and had gotten bored, so I figured I'd show them this abandoned house about a mile away. We called it the Spook House. It wasn't really scary in the day, but this was 1 a.m., making it all the more fun. I had planned to act like a tour guide for them, maybe even try to scare them a little, even though the only scary thing I could imagine was running into a methed up homeless person. We eventually get to the house after 10 or 15 minutes, and I begin my tour guide routine. And it's important to note you can only get in through the back. The front's boarded up, and I don't like vandalizing things, so we're walking up the driveway to the back. I'm looking at them talking about the house with my back turned to the back door, when my friend gets this horrified look on his face, and in kind of a whisper yell says, "Dude, look!" So obviously I look behind me and see what looks like a person crawling out of the house on their hands and knees. I could only see the front half of it. The thing then looks at us. It has huge white eyes that pretty much match its skin. It's extremely skinny. It kind of reminded me of pictures of Holocaust survivors. It had no hair that I could tell, but the moment was very brief. It stopped looking at us after a few seconds, then bolted into the woods behind the house. Needless to say, we were all pretty terrified, so we booked it back to my house. We stayed up all night, talking on my front porch. As we were talking, we heard branches breaking out past the backyard. I'm not saying it was related, just a very strange coincidence that gave us yet another scare. I had no idea what skinwalkers were back then, but I did know about the rake. I've honestly never been that terrified in my life. We were probably only 15 or 20 feet from it. If anyone's interested, I live in southeast Indiana, and have heard similar stories from other people. So when I was in my 20s, 10 years ago, I moved to London. I moved in with 2 South African girls who were very sweet and nice, and who really liked smoking weed. One thing I wasn't prepared for is that UK homes are cold, so most people have a hot water bottle and a blanket when they hang out at home. Anyway, we lived in this old Victorian flat on the high street, on the top floor, 4 stories up or so. We had to climb up narrow, winding stairs and then had to go through 3 doors to get in. One with iron bars, and then there was a little space big enough for a few people to stand, and 2 other doors. We told ourselves it was to protect the fancy stained glass door. Then there was a normal wooden door. I come home from my job at the pub around 3 p.m., not expecting anyone to be home. I go straight to my room, throw my keys on the bed and start brushing my hair, getting ready for my next job. Gotta pay that London rent. As I was brushing my hair, I could have sworn I heard something coming from the kitchen. I stopped. I said, "Hello?" And when nobody answered, I kept brushing my hair. I heard a noise again and stopped. It sounded like someone wearing work boots walking in the kitchen, carrying a hot water bottle, that swishing sound it makes. I freak out, and in a panic, think grab something sharp. I grabbed the pen next to my keys on the bed, not realizing until later that I should have grabbed the keys so that I could actually get out of those 3 doors. I run down the hall and up the 4 or 5 steps, turn into the next hall and go into the living room, which was next to the doors. I shut the first door and sat against it so nobody can come in. I'm holding my pen like a maniac. I had my phone on me, and for some reason I didn't think to call the cops, but called my ex, the only person I knew in London. I guess because he knew where I lived, and could get the cops for me in case something happened before I could call them. Next, I hang up and call the cops. They are on the way. I can't remember if I stayed on the phone or not, but what happened next was, the heavy work boots started walking up the hall, with quiet steps up the stairs like they didn't want to be heard. I could still hear the swishing as whoever it was got to the other side of the door. I was properly freaking out, crying and shaking. I wanted to just jump out the window. There was a butcher shop on the ground floor, and they let the cops into the stairwell so that they could come up. But of course, they couldn't get through the iron one. They told me that I needed to get my keys so that I can open the door. I told them no, the guy is in there. But they said either that or they have to wait to get the tools to cut through the bars. She finally talks me into opening the door. I do, and can immediately feel the air go flat. Nobody's there, and I feel like, I don't know, like I was in another level or slice of reality. I run and get the keys, and open the door. 6 police officers pour into the place. I help them look everywhere for an intruder, under the beds, in the closets, etc. They confirm that nobody could have gotten through the window or back door as they were locked. There was an attic, but it was really high up and there's no way to get up there. They're standing in the kitchen with me, calming me down, telling me it could have been a sound from my neighbors. It couldn't have been, as we never heard them at all. I noticed one of them glancing behind me nonchalantly, and it was only after they left that I realized that behind me was my flatmate's pot plant. They must have thought I was stoned and hearing things. I wasn't. What I heard was so real, and it didn't even cross my mind that it could be a ghost. It felt more like the blurring of time and space, like someone who was alive or thought they were. It all started when a buddy of mine that I go to college with, Matt, wanted to skip a day of class and take a weekday trip up to Pendo County to get some late fall dirt biking in before it snowed and the season was officially over. We had gotten some riding done in the area before, but instead of going to our usual romping ground, we opted to shoot for a lesser-known trail that a friend had told us about. So early Tuesday morning we loaded up our bikes into the truck, printed out a map of the area that showed all the logging roads and the few official dirt bike trails there were, and headed out. I want to clarify that this was not private land. We're very careful to only ride on public land, where we are allowed to do so. Traffic was really light, so we arrived at the spot we were planning on parking the truck in only 1.5 hours, which meant we had plenty of daylight to go out and ride, though we both have headlights on our bikes, and had agreed that a little bit of darkness wouldn't be allowed to put a damper on the fun. After we unloaded, we locked up the truck, rode down the highway on the shoulder for about half a mile, then turned off onto the logging road this awesome trail supposedly split off of. It was a 10-ish mile ride down this logging road to get to the trailhead, and we were probably a little over halfway there, when from behind us, we hear a loud-ass engine. This beater of a truck flies by us, damn near hitting Matt, and then disappears around the next turn. And it's not like Matt and I were going slow. We aren't pro riders or anything, but we're definitely not bad. The last time I had checked, we were doing 37, which is pretty fast on a crappy abandoned road. After this, Matt stopped and killed his engine, so we could make sure I knew just how pissed he was. "Did you see that fucking shit? Dude almost killed me." We decided that while we were already stopped, we would take a quick break, drink some water, then get back after it. And get back after it we did. We found the trailhead and were loving it. The views were nice. The trail was technical without being unfun. The ground was wet but not soggy, and there were tons of additional trails that had been marked by other riders. Eventually, we came across 2 separate offshoot trails, one going up the hill we were facing, and one going down to the right. They were both marked with "ends at such and such creek" signs that had been made from plywood and spray paint and propped against trees. After consulting the map, we concluded that they probably did. One trail went over the hill, and the other more or less went down the side into a small valley and around. I wanted to go low, Matt wanted to go high, so we split up and decided to meet at the creek. My ride was nice for the most part, though it did become very gravelly and steep at times, and I reached the bottom of the little valley. Soon I could see an open clearing at the end of the tunnel of trees I was in, and as I rode up, I could hear what I thought to be Matt's engine. But when I pulled out of the trees and into the clearing by the creek, I saw that it wasn't a dirt bike, but a gas-powered generator. It was powering what looked like an old stove that sat under the overhang of a windowless shack made out of plywood and 2x4s. Next to the makeshift house was the truck we had seen earlier. I killed my engine, not wanting whoever was inside to hear me, and moved in a bit closer. I didn't get too close, But even from where I stood, probably 50 yards or more away, I could smell something. I could see that there was a big soup pot on the stove, which was boiling what I could only assume was bleach, judging by the containers that were strewn about all over the place. That's when I saw a guy come running out from behind his shack, shotgun in hand, looking at the woods near the other side of the clearing, and he was screaming.
"What the fuck do you think you're doing?"
At that moment, I heard Matt's bike roar to life, and immediately saw him tearing out of the tree line beyond the shack. He saw me, and as he rode towards me at full tilt, I hear him screaming at the top of his lungs. "He has a gun! Get the fuck out of here!" Luckily, my bike started on the first kick, and I was able to spin the bike around and tear out of there, right on Matt's tail. I don't think I've ever gone so fast through trails that steep and technical in my life, but somehow we made it out without either of us going down. We got back to the truck in under an hour, and immediately noticed that ours was no longer the only one in the parking lot. That goddamn piece of junk pickup had beat us there. He must have had a shortcut to the logging road, and the driver was now just staring at us. Hoping that he wouldn't approach us since we were right off a decently populated highway, we quickly loaded our stuff and left. But he followed, and it was more than an hour before we were able to lose him at a stoplight. The local police were called, but they pretty much told us that they wouldn't be looking into it, because if they looked into every report like ours, they'd never be doing anything else. Needless to say, we won't be riding around there again anytime soon. When I was around 4 years old, I had an experience that has forever changed my life and belief in the paranormal. This is one of, if not the oldest memory of my childhood. I'm nearly 30 years old at this point. Anyway, during this time I was being instructed by my parents to learn to sleep alone in my bedroom. Previously I was allowed to sleep in their bed. This did not sit well with me. As with most children, I had an irrational fear of the dark and being alone during the night. But they insisted, and so I would be laid to bed fairly early by adult standards, around 8 or 9 p.m. Since it was still early evening for them, they would go about their business and be doing things in the living room, where I could still see lights and hear the sounds of the household. This was comforting enough for me. Knowing others were around and awake made me feel safe. I drifted off to sleep while the ambient noise and light was still around, and that's the last thing I remember until the encounter. Suddenly, I was jolted from my sleep, and the house was black. My room and the whole house was dead quiet, to the point of hearing that ringing noise that occurs when no other sound is being made. I was instantly on edge and afraid, with heightened senses and an acute awareness of my surroundings. I'm not sure what woke me up, but I was terrified. My bed faced the doorway to my room, which opened up into a small hallway. For a few minutes I sat up straight in bed and looked at the doorway. I was compelled to look in that direction. It's almost as if I was instinctually anticipating something or someone to walk from the hallway into my room. Lo and behold, that is exactly what occurred a few moments later. The first thing to appear into vision was a bony, deformed hand and arm, and in an instant it disappeared. And the next, a skeletal woman's profile, with a torn dress and disheveled hair. Another disappearance, and it reappeared now facing me, with an outstretched hand, mouth agape, and empty eye sockets. This apparition was moving in what seemed like the flash of a camera. The only way I can describe it would be quickly disappearing and reappearing, having repositioned and moved, like being in a strobe light. Another reason I liken this to camera flashing is because of her color. It wasn't pale or green, like I've heard other stories describe some ghosts as. No red eyes or shadowy amorphous shape. This thing, this woman, was clearly defined in shape and detail, but her color was like when you see a flash of light or stare at the sun, that multicolor that shows up in the back of your eyes when you reopen them. She made it about halfway into my room before I cowered under the covers, expecting the worst, But then, nothing happened. She had been moving toward me and should have reached me, but she never did. I waited for what seemed like forever with my eyes closed, but nothing. After a while, I worked up the courage to leave my covers and look at my surroundings again. The ghost was gone, or at least not in my room, but I didn't stick around to find out what would happen if I stayed. I bolted to my parents' room and spent the rest of the night there. I told my parents the next morning and we had the house blessed, and I did not have any more experiences, at least nothing as vivid or definitive as what I saw that night. But this all bugs me because I was so young. I wasn't old enough to be exposed to anything that would put that image in my head. I had not seen any scary movies, or even knew very well what a ghost was or did. It was terrifying. Since this experience, I have believed in the paranormal. I feel there are so many things that we can't explain. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. If you want me to tell your story, or read a creepypasta, email me at the address in the description. Come follow me on Twitter and Instagram at CoreyRhino. Be good to animals, even people. Sit.
Ja, snämmar, bärksbes, hresh.
Oh man, we're out of salsa. Damn. Hey Vern, we're out of salsa.
Wait, I got some more. There you go.
Wait a minute, what the hell? This stuff's made in New York City.
New York City?
Oh hell no. Jack, drag this asshole behind your horse for a while.
Well, can I at least read a magazine?
It's pitch black out, Vern.
Maybe I'll play a game on my phone.
Yeah, you do that. You know what? This shit ain't half bad.